process. Assemble Plus provides scientists with on-site or remote access to biological resources, varied ecosystems, experimental facilities, technology platforms, e-infrastructure, and expertise, and provides lodging and catering support over the course of their placement. Assemble Plus also performs its own networking and research activities, ranging from interacting with new users and businesses to cryobanking marine organisms to providing diving services for researchers. Over the course of the project, as well as providing access, Assemble Plus aims to strengthen transnational and multidisciplinary networks, create public-private partnerships, enable new technologies and services, upskill researchers, and improve the long-term sustainability of Europe's marine biological stations. So, if you're a researcher in need of access to marine infrastructure, such as laboratories, equipment, or any other provision, Assemble Plus welcomes proposals for access on a rolling basis from the 29th of August 2018 to the 30th of October 2020. For more information about the project and call for access, please visit www.assembleplus.eu.
So, good morning, everybody.
First-class scientific research relies on effective, convenient access.
Assemble Plus provides scientists with on-site or remote access to biological resources, varied ecosystems, experimental facilities, technology platforms, e-infrastructure, and expertise, and provides lodging and catering.
Sorry, I had some other thing going on in the background. So, good morning, everyone. We are welcome to the Knowledge and Technology Gap Forum, in which today we'll address policy issues. And basically, the question is the value of research infrastructures from a policy point of view. So I am one of the organizers of this conference on behalf of Assemble Plus, and I'm also vice chair of the MBRC, the European Marine Biological Resource Center. With me as moderator of the panel, together with me, is Nicholas Spade. He is also the executive director of MBRC. And our panel is Sheila Aymans. She's the executive director of Marine Board, which is a think tank in marine science policy. It's a platform to advance marine research and to bridge the gap between science and policy. It provides a strategic forum to develop marine research foresight, initiate state-of-the-art analysis, and translate these into clear policy recommendations to European institutions as well as national government. With us as well is Giuseppe Magnifico, is the Vice President of Eurocian. Eurocian is the European Center for Information on Marine Science and Technology, which was established in 2002, is an independent scientific non-governmental organization whose membership comprises leading European marine research, funding, and outreach organization. Its aim is to facilitate information exchange and generate value-added products in the field of marine sciences and technologies between a wide range of governmental and non-governmental bodies. And Claire Joly is the head of innovation policies for Space and Oceans Unit of the OECD, the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. And their team works to provide evidence-based information to improve the research and innovation policy mix for sustainable ocean management. Thank you, all of you, the panel, for accepting this invitation. For us, it's a very valuable contribution for this discussion. So all these organizations have in the past produced some reports or comments on the research infrastructures. So our interest is to discuss really how important marine research infrastructures are from the point of view of policy, including projects like Assemble Plus. So we'll start with each member of the panel introducing themselves and also the topic with a general statement. We'll then proceed with discussing the issues that were raised and bring more questions to the table. At that stage, we can also ask the audience to write any questions in the chat. So we can start, and I will ask Sheila to start with the first introduction. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Adelino, and thank you very much for inviting me. As Adelina said, I am Sheila Hamas. I'm the Executive Director of the European Marine Board. But maybe what he didn't mention is that I actually used to work at SAMS, which is one of your member organizations. So the European Marine Board, we support research organizations, or we represent research organizations across Europe. And as such, a lot of your members are by default some of our members. So I think, in a sense, it's a little bit difficult for me to be objective here. But I think research infrastructures are obviously very important. And I think going forward with where we want to go with the Ocean Decade, these things will become even more important. I think one of the things that you could probably work on is to speak to each other more and to make sure that you actually know what everybody else is doing, because I think that really helps. And then it will be also quite helpful if you guys were able to make sure that all of your data that you have available are available on open access databases. So those are sort of things that in some of the questions that you asked us to think about that I thought was quite interesting. But that's a little bit negative. I would say that when I used to work at SAMS, one of the amazing things about the Assemble Plus was that there was always new people coming around, and you got to learn a lot from the other scientists who came to visit. And I think it was a great way for scientists to learn new methods, for people to use each other's. At SAMS, there was the culture collection. So they did quite a lot of work with learning how to work with the culture collection. So there was a lot of good things that came out of it. And I think it was a great program for that. And I'll leave it at that. Maybe other people have more to add.
Okay, thank you. So Giuseppe, you can now give your
May I share my screen? I have a brief presentation about my thoughts.
Yeah, you can share.
You see this one?
Yeah, it's coming along. Just have to click on the full.
Okay.
That's it.
Okay, so good morning, everybody. First of all, let me thank Adelino and Nicolas for inviting me to be here today and contribute to this panel discussion. My name is Giuseppe Magnifico, and I work at the National Research Council of Italy, where I'm responsible for the organizational unit in charge to provide support to the management of our large-scale facilities, including marine research infrastructures, such as research vessels and different platform for oceanographic observing. I'm here today, as Adelino said, representing Euroocean, the European Centre for Information on Marine Science Technology. I'm Vice President of the Executive Committee, and I would like to bring you all greetings from the Executive Director of the Euroocean, Sergio Brighton. I would have liked to start with a brief introduction of Euroocean. Adelino said most of the information about this. As he said, is an independent non-profit scientific organization based in Lisbon, founded in 2002. We aim to support European marine science and technology advances by promoting information exchange, cooperation and collaboration among the members, but also with the wider ocean community and society. Full members, two types of members in this foundation, full members from 11 countries with a pool of 150 infrastructures, 6 cooperating members, which are organizations with a regional global reach and are involved in complementary activities of those of Euroocean. And Euroocean operates in the ocean science domain. As we know, ocean science has become big science, involving sophisticated, also expensive equipment, research vessel, platform, mobile unit, remote sensing tools, land-based facilities as marine stations, and infrastructures. And the provision of information about these facilities is essential for ocean science and technology development. Many activities, such as identification of capability gaps and opportunities of decision-making action for development of funding priorities, need this type of information. And Euroocean, since 2006, develops this database, a marine research infrastructure database. It is called READ. It is a repository of technical, scientific, and operational information about the Euroocean marine, about the European marine research infrastructures. Lists around 900 infrastructures in Europe from 35 countries. Data are provided by all operators of research infrastructure, then are verified and harmonized with relevant standards. And for over 15 years, Euroocean has gathered, maintained, and provided free access to information about marine research infrastructure through the READ, which has also facilitated various marine research policy support, education, and training activities in Europe and worldwide. And our aim is to continue to improve these initiatives. And we are considering the possibility to create a European community of interest on marine research infrastructure information. So the aim is to enlarge the community traditionally behind the READ development and to discuss about a way to improve the updating and the visibility of this database. I would like to spend a few words about the ocean. Sorry, these just few figures about the database, 900 records in 14 categories: research vessel, underwater vehicles, or coastal or fixed point ocean observation system, marine biology stations. And 20% of these facilities are involved in key European initiatives and projects, as MBRC, Assemble, EMSO, Jericho, or Eurofis Plus. I would like to add also a few words about the ocean observing landscape in Europe and give some contribution in terms of action. As we know, the landscape is very diverse and complex with different stakeholders, with different organizations, with different strategy, road mappings, needs and offer. And at the European level already exists some level of coordination through the ERICS, for example, or project or other initiatives which aim to integrate the ocean observing landscape in Europe. And to become a multi-platform, multidisciplinary system for Europe is a need. And this cannot be, of course, only a simple sum of different parts. And the idea or the need is to evolve from a single focus infrastructure organization of regions toward an inclusive federation able to integrate, collaborate, share information, share assets, and able to speak with a unified voice. And big efforts toward implementing an integrated marine research infrastructure ecosystem in Europe are being made today by the European Ocean Observing System. And I would like to mention, if you're not aware about this, it is a coordinated framework to align, with the aim to align and integrate Europe's ocean observation capacity in Europe. And I would like to mention recently part of the governance of this framework, the Operation Committee, recently established, and which represent the ocean observing implementers at national, regional, and pan-European levels. And the first meeting took place this last November. And the main outcomes from this meeting were summarized around 4 topics with related recommendation, which I would like to share with you briefly to as a contribution from our discussion. In terms of engagement, we need national committees able to bring together different stakeholder sectors from all stakeholders, people who fund observation, who use and make observations, and also produce or manufacture or sell equipment for ocean observation. We can leverage the existing coordination structures, which are a resource for capacity building. In terms of communication support, the need to bespoke, as also Sheila said, to have bespoke communication, which able to highlight the societal benefit of ocean observing, but also to highlight the risk from losing these capabilities. If today we switch off all the infrastructure, the impact that this can have. Information exchange, this is a field where Euroocean wants to contribute information exchange across sector, nations, infrastructure, and to identify commonalities, opportunities to work more efficiently through cooperation. And a possibility is to have an integration of regional workshop able to collect different observing communities of multi-sectoral community, monitoring, research, and industrial components. And in terms of a body, important to use the existing initiatives in Nation Decade or the public consultation from the European Commission sharing responsibility on ocean observing to advocate for sustained funding in ocean observing. To conclude, I would like to say that research structure, as we know, are fundamental to produce new knowledge, innovation, to help understand and tackle environmental, societal, and economic challenges that we face. And for that reason, research infrastructure are key valuable resources for all European policies which aims, or strategies, plans, which aims to achieve environmental and sustainable development targets. If we want to see in a different way, all target list in, for example, these four policies initiatives from the European Commission will not be achievable without significant support from research infrastructures. To conclude, I would like to thank you all for your time. Thank you.
Thank you, Giuseppe. Please, Claire, please make your statement.
Thanks, Adelino, and thanks for the invitation. Hello, everyone. So I'll also share my screen. So I work at the OECD, which is an international economic organization, but I work in a directorate, which is specifically looking at science and technology and innovation. So, and in this particular directorate, we're looking specifically at the ocean. Some of you may know some of these publications, and I'll refer particularly to the second one here, Rethinking Innovation for a Sustainable Ocean Economy, where we do provide some findings on innovation networks. That's something I'm going to talk about. But this panel really was asked to address some of these questions concerning the value of research infrastructure. Our colleague Giuseppe just mentioned here some of the key values coming out of the research infrastructure in feeding into some of the European policies. But obviously there are still many questions on how to channel funds through this research infrastructure, nationally and internationally, to make sure that they get indeed to the objectives that they should have. So here I'll go into a bit more detail in this fourth point here, in terms of the strategy that some of the research infrastructure, including the ones that you work with for marine biology, and some pointers here on how indeed to improve maybe the value proposition of some of these infrastructure. Typically, and this is some work that has been done within the OECD with our colleagues on the Global Science Forum, there are a number of challenges that are facing typically research infrastructure of all types. Challenges in terms of portfolio management. Typically, a research infrastructure competes with other research infrastructure in a broader research innovation system. There are issues of long-term planning, but most importantly, the budget availability versus some of the demand that you're receiving. And I can see, of course, in particular for marine biology, the stronger and stronger demand that will be put on you as scientists in view of the UN Decade for Oceans on Ocean Science, because typically the advances that we're seeing, the technical advances, the scientific advances are very exciting, but that also requires much more commitment, I would say, for many of the stations that many of you are working for. In terms also of, I would say, the national versus international investments. And that's something that's also, I think, very important for European research infrastructure in particular, as most of them are really funded at national level to start with, but all along, as European programs are taking up more and more, I would say, importance, then there's this issue of long-term duration of some projects. And I think we're seeing this particularly on ocean observations. There are a lot of discussions concerning EOS that we just heard, but also in terms of some of the infrastructure that are actually in situ that need to be funded over the long run. So again, these are some of the challenges. The idea is not to reinvent the wheel, but here I'm just giving you some pointers, and I'd be very happy to share this PowerPoint with all of you afterwards. Now, if I focus a little bit on this second family of challenges that has to do with the user-based optimization. Typically, you know very well some of the scientists that are working with you. These are your typical users, but do you know them well? do they also know well how to access facilities, resources, and services? We had yesterday 2 great presentations, and thanks again for inviting me to this conference, very useful in terms of what's happening in France and what's happening in Portugal, in terms of indeed facilitating the access to some of the research facilities. This is not always obvious, I would say, for some of the communities of users. So with all this, let me now mention maybe 2 options for strategic orientations. The first one has to do with monitoring the user base, some mechanisms. They are well known in some cases, and they're not always used. The monitoring mechanisms that we are seeing at the research infrastructure level are quite different, but they can actually be quite useful. And I would suggest that you take this as a portfolio that could actually help you out. In terms, for instance, of the collection of user access information during user meetings. This is typically an interesting way of collecting data on even gender, of who's coming to your workshops, who's coming to your conferences. And typically that fed into the Global Ocean Science Report that was just launched a few weeks ago by the IOC, and that actually built up some interesting indicators to see how, depending on the communities, and that may include also marine biology, you can see different types of users, different types of scientific communities joining the meetings. And that shows more and more interdisciplinarity, I would say, in some of the conferences. There are also some typical requests to your users or principal investigators, some of the PIs that are included in some of the projects. There were a few examples yesterday from friends actually showing how they indeed try to keep track who's coming, who's joining, who's participating in sometimes very small case limited projects, as to make sure that they actually get a good understanding of who's coming and going in the facilities. Now, there are also some regular and ad hoc surveys on the facility or the resource use that may include accessing a portal, but also including very specific surveys. And we just finalized one with the UK Marine Environmental Data and Information Network, UK MEDIN, which is really in charge of putting together a network of very different type of data centers so that they all use more or less the same, I would say, definitions in providing their data to users. So again, regular ad hoc surveys, very useful to actually track the users and their feedback. Now, maybe just to finalize here, very often research infrastructure are sitting on a lot of data that they're not using for this particular purpose of trying to monitor the user base. And that's typically data that's collected via training, via annual reporting processes, extraction from proposals. There you can also have a lot of useful data that gives you, again, an idea of how to track your user base. The important factor here is then how do you monetize or put a value on the amount, the types of users you have in your research infrastructure. And that's something that we are working very closely with. We can come back to that during the discussions maybe. So one angle really here in the strategy, monitoring the user base, that really I think should be a key principle for any research infrastructure. Another strategy here is, I think, really well represented by this Assemble network, is really building on these new research and innovation networks in the ocean economy. So that's something that we have been looking at the OECD for a number of 2-3 years, working together via industry clusters, linking research institutes with a number of private players. This is not new, that has been going on for decades, but we are seeing a new phase here. There's really, I would say, multiplication of different innovation networks, typically linked to the ocean economy. That has to do with aquaculture, robotics, that has to do also with ocean energy. The multiplication of all these hubs, innovation hubs, is just incredible. We just had a workshop a few weeks ago with Canada and the United States in particular, looking at research and innovation networks in this part of the world. This is booming. just incredible. Creating, I think, also some competition, but also probably some loss of efficiencies. We can come back to that. Typically, when we talk about research and innovation networks here, there's a network orchestrator. Typically, it's a research infrastructure, public research infrastructure, that contributes to build this network, design it with the membership, the structure, the network positioning, but also really orchestrating, managing the knowledge mobility, the intellectual property, and the stability of the network. This seems quite, I would say, abstract, theoretical, but in reality, we have different models that are actually quite new. Here I listed some of the ocean economy innovation networks that we worked with over the past couple of years. They were all launched in the past 3 to 4 years. Building up, I would say, a very strong link with different actors. And I see this in marine biology too, whereas there's this strong need to actually link between the pure fundamental research all the way to the applications with startups. We're seeing this in different parts. So what I would suggest here is indeed to take a look at some of these existing networks and see where you might fit as a research infrastructure. Why? Because there are a number of benefits. Typically, improving cross-sector synergies, accessing various research facilities. This is already, I think, a raison d'être from the Assemble network that has been built up. But also developing and bringing to market brand new products for industry. That's also something I think that we are seeing more and more, particularly in a number of European and North American networks. So this is again a strategy that may seem a bit far away from some pure fundamental science that's been conducted. But when you think of it, you need to be part of some of these networks to make sure that the value proposition of the science that you're doing is actually well linked to some of these other activities that are going on. So there are still some open innovation. How do some of these network activities are recorded? Some of the social economy effects and how are they measured? And toward more internationalization of these national networks. Again, public funding is often coming from national authorities and then is supplemented by international investments. So at this stage, at the OECD, I hope it was clear to you, we are really looking at the value proposition. And by value, I mean from pure science all the way to socioeconomic impacts of research infrastructure. One should not go without the other, although for us, at the end of the day, the baseline is always science. We need to make sure that the investment in science is there. But what about tracking the value that's coming out? Also, with other activities surrounding the research infrastructure. And that's where I think a little thing sometimes can be missing. So I'll stop here and I look forward to the discussion we will have with colleagues.
Thank you, Claire. Well, thank you everyone. It's very interesting points of view. I would go back to Sheila because she mentioned some aspects that I would like to explore a bit more. And one of the things that was mentioned is more cooperation. So dialogue. How do you see this can be implemented and what it can, what were you thinking essentially when you put forward this idea?
Well, so I think it's quite important, and I think both Giuseppe and Claire mentioned it. I think it's really important that you work together with the other research infrastructures and the other networks like Claire was talking about. But also, I think you really need to have a dialogue with the data providers, because at least the biological observations stations that I know sit on a huge amount of data, and it's not clear if that data is actually available for everybody to use. And it's a little bit counterintuitive to imagine that if you give your data to EMODnet, for instance, or to a different data provider, then you're giving your the value of your data away. But actually what it does is it shows the value of the network, and it shows the value of the research station. So data is basically a commodity that you can use to make people aware how important you are. So I think you have to think about these things. I know that I've spoken to other people who say, but it's my data and I've spent a lot of time collecting it. And I know that in some places, the data is not in a fit state to be given to EMODnet, for instance, because it takes the time to incorporate that. But if you speak to the EMODnet people, they will help you to do that. Mm-hmm. So that's one place where I think you can really communicate better with your data stream and make people aware of the importance of these biological network stations. Because if you don't do that, they won't value you.
Okay, thank you. I don't know if anyone else wants to add to this. Maybe Nick, because I think we have been doing some of this work towards making data available. From my point of view, at least from what I've been involved with, of course, this is a big effort internationally and the EU, and the example you just gave. Actually, I'm also confronted in my center, because while some people are aware of the importance of making data publicly available, there are others that have those fears that you just mentioned. And I can also extend this to the situation in Portugal. Not all institutes have that policy. At least we find difficulties, to reach data in public institutes. These are supposed to be even given, at the forefront of making data available, because they are actually state institutes. So I think that Nick may have a different, or at least another perspective, because he's on the seat, the driving seat of some of these issues.
Thanks, Adelino, and thank you, Sheila, for bringing this up. I think this is an extremely important point, because indeed there's vast amount of information and data sitting completely unused, and very much a lot of this data has been collected over a long time and would fit very well into the mantra of collect once, use many times. And actually, part of Assemble Plus, we have a work package on this to explore the data that exists. How can we make it better available? And indeed, also encourage the users of the Assemble Plus Transnational Access Program to submit their data in open access platforms. And this has been an incredibly challenging amount of work to do. First of all, with the verification of data. A lot of the data has been collected a long time ago, and making it fair and therefore available, or part of that is making it available, is hugely challenging. And what happens very often with these sorts of issues like verification of data or the Nagoya Protocol and access and benefit sharing is we get new ideas, new demands that come in, but we massively lack the resources to actually then implement it behind it, because people don't think about the fact to make all this available, to transform it, it takes an enormous amount of people's time. And so this is one of the bottlenecks we're currently facing. Another one of them, and which relates then back to FAIR again, is there's a complete lack of awareness in, not just in young scientists, but throughout the generations. And we're still not teaching these things at university, explaining to people the value of FAIR and how we generate FAIR. And I think that's another one of the bottlenecks. And I think indeed the infrastructures here could play a role in raising awareness of this. And I know the e-infrastructures think about this a lot. I welcome the point on EMODnet, because I wasn't aware that they could help with these issues. So even though we work with them, I didn't know that. So I think we'll be reaching out to them on this. But also on this issue of data, then perhaps I'll turn this into a question as well to the three of you, because observation has been mentioned quite a few times. And traditionally, this isn't really a part of what EMBRC has been doing. It's been part of what Assemble has been trying to set up, particularly biological observation and genomics observation. Ocean Sampling Day has been sort of a pilot study for us on this. Do you see this as being something valuable for EMBRC in terms, Claire, you mentioned value proposition. Giuseppe, you talked about the EOS. is this something valuable for EMBRC to move into, or is this stretching our portfolio too far? Or is this really somewhere that would be interesting to explore for Assemble Plus and EMBRC?
Well, if I may, yes, I do believe that indeed there's a lot of attention right now on marine biology. And it has been growing, well, for a number of years, obviously, but just a year ago, there was a large conference. It's a conference taking place only every 10 years on the ocean observing systems. And typically, marine biology was included in all the discussions. And you probably saw also that in the framework of the Global Ocean Observing System, GOOS, there's this question: how do you actually include some of the biological variables to make sure that you are indeed taking into account, a crucial element when you want to actually assess marine ecosystems, biology. So I do believe indeed that it's a bit of a shock for many researchers to actually have to talk to, physical oceanography, the physical oceanography community, and for them too. But at the end of the day, I think that's the natural way to proceed, even though it's so challenging, I realize that. But from the OECD point of view, we are not the ocean researchers here. But whenever you talk to a policymaker, for them, ocean research, it's one big group. They don't see all the disciplines. So that's something that I think needs to be taken into account whenever you produce your own reports and your own work. Obviously, you're part of a much broader community, but at the end of the day, if you can align yourself and make sure that you're in, all the right places to make sure that marine biology is not forgotten, that's going to be crucial.
If I may, sorry,
and I think there are microphones on.
I think, Sheila, we're losing the connection with you.
Yes, so we cannot hear you, Sheila, very well.
Sheila, the network is not working.
Claire was saying there, indeed, at Ocean Ops Bali,
It seems as if we lost.
Yeah. Giuseppe, please go ahead if you wanted to add something.
Just to complement what Claire said, my background is marine biology. And so for me, it's logical how important are biological observation of the ocean, of the sea, a crucial component of the European ocean landscape. And but far as I know, biological observation seems to be today poorly integrated in monitor efforts in Europe. And so your question was the benefits to have biological observation networks of EMBRC in the EOS, and I think you are ready in this kind of framework. And so we worked together last November. But I just want to highlight how expensive and costly and pricey is to do biological observation. That's why I think you need to use research vessels. I'm involved in the third edition of the Eurofis Plus project. We also give access to research vessels. You need to use also boats or ships, of course, mobile units. And for me, one of the most alarming, worrying situation is about the long-term sustainability of these tools. There is a recent publication from the Copernicus and the European Environmental Agency, and if we think that only 28% of systems involved in ocean observation have a clear long-term funding to ensure their sustainability. So I think that there are one component is to improve the exchange of information, not to lose lesson learned. We attend many meetings. We are attending many virtual meetings these times, and we need to collect all the information, thoughts, idea, suggestions, and try to speak within the Ocean Service System with a unified voice, and try to and put more efforts in order to advocate for sustained funding, which I think it's not only, of course, a financial issues, but in a short term, it's more financial issues. That's my contribution on this.
Thank you, Giuseppe. You just raised another point, of course, which we also try to address in this project. In fact, it comes up in every project, the question of sustainability. And in fact, I can say, I mentioned this yesterday, but I can say is that Assemble Plus is a product of an attempt for sustainability. You know, in FP6, we had the networks of excellence. And one of the conditions for the networks of excellence was that we had to find ways of them becoming sustainable. And so, you know, the next level was essentially one of the outputs of this search for sustainability was, you know, infrastructures, you know, and try to develop them. So this is, and we seem to continue on this, and probably it will go on for a long time. But as you mentioned, you know, anything to do with the marine systems is expensive. You know, it's by definition because of the nature, and what the point that Claire made about, you know, basically this is a diverse field. The needs are not the same everywhere. You know, what you mentioned before is more to do with oceanographic aspects. We are, the marine stations are more at the edge of the sea, but they still require large investments. But they also can have very profitable and positive outputs. And I can think of, you know, Claire again gave some examples, but you know, here where we are, and this is probably applicable in most cases with slight different nuances, where we are in the Algarve, 80% of the economy is tourism. That makes it very vulnerable. And we really are extremely important for in this area. I mean, our center and infrastructure, because we can support the local economy in different ways. So I think this is, you know, there's no doubt about the value, although this is always a question how to value, and I guess Claire has experience in this kind of things. So so one of the points is communication, and of course you also mentioned that we should have a single voice. That's not so easy, I guess, but certainly we have to find ways of better communicating. Sorry, Sheila, but we you know, somehow the communication was lost there. So if you want to put your case again,
thank you.
Appreciate it.
Sorry, yes, I think I don't know if everybody knows, but I'm actually in Namibia still, so there might have been some sort of glitch from the northern to the southern hemisphere there for a moment. So yes, I was saying that I totally agree with what Claire and both Giuseppe has said. Of course, the biological observations are very, very expensive, and indeed the biological observations that was mentioned and taken up by the ocean ops community was more oceanographic in that sense. In other words, it wasn't really biological station type observations. And I think there was definitely a gap there. And it's definitely something you've got 10 years to work towards to make sure that you're at that next conference. But the other thing that I should mention is that actually at the Marine Board, we're just looking at, we've got a working group specifically looking at sustainable funding for ocean observations. So while sustainable infrastructure funding And I suspect it will mostly, again, be open ocean more than biological stations, but it's definitely something that we've seen that this is the problem, and it is something that we need to look at in more detail. So we will, hopefully by June, we'll have a document out that will highlight the problem. It will not come with solutions, I don't think, but at least it'll be clear that there is a huge problem there. The other thing I was going to mention is that I don't know how much you guys work with the MBON and those guys. So the more biological parts of BON, which I think would be quite helpful for you to engage with them as well. And to note that under the EuroSea project, which is another big, large oceanographic project following on from Atlantos, they're really looking at trying to pull together all the biological networks of biological data across Europe as well. So there's definitely, you should definitely be aware of that and make sure that you're engaged with that.
So maybe I'll just respond to that to say, first of all, in terms of MBON, indeed, we are working with them, and we're also working in one of the UN decade proposals we're involved with on this, which is entirely dedicated to actually genomics observation. We're involved in a couple, but so we're already speaking to MBON and also looking at how we can potentially create a BON for genomics observation in Europe. So this is already something that that's going on in conversations that we're involved with. In terms of coordination amongst the research infrastructures in the last 6 months, this is something, a discussion we've started as well within the marine ones to say, well, look, what space are we each occupying? What observation are we doing? And how can we fit into the general puzzle of marine observation in Europe and as a contribution to global efforts? So we welcome very much these discussions. And Sheila, we really look forward to seeing your report as well on the issues around sustainability. It's also been discussed quite a bit before Christmas. There was a flurry of workshops on these topics, which was really useful and really helpful as well for preparing the decade. So I think that was good. If I may, I would like to turn a little bit away from the biological observation side and maybe come back a bit to the Assemble Plus and some of the comments that that you guys opened with, particularly around the users and how infrastructure can support things. And there, I'm quite interested to hear what your views are in how we can. Somebody mentioned value proposition as well. How we can make the research infrastructures and the facilities available in Assemble Plus and EMBRC, for example, more attractive and more used by the community. I think there's still ways that we need to explore to improve our visibility and our attractiveness. Whereas we have got good use of our facilities, we certainly still have more capacity. And we're very keen to be more operational in the spaces that were mentioned of these new areas of technology. But we have such a broad portfolio, and marine biology is so vast and it's all lumped into one infrastructure that sometimes it's difficult to really raise a flag on where you fit in, because you can do it all. You have facilities to support all of this vast research. So my question to you is it too broad? Do we need to narrow down more? Or how do we really bring the message across that there is an awful lot we can do in terms of supporting research and researchers, be that innovation or research, fundamental research? Before I pass on the word to the panel, just to give you some hint. I think from, although we know that we probably could have a wider, let's say, communicate to a wider scientific community, we already have quite a good level of participation in some ways. Although I think that we need to reach out, not just in the field of marine biology, but people that work in related fields that can use this to make it even more multidisciplinary, but also to bring in people that have different views. We have very interesting examples from the first assemble. So we had this, the first assemble was from 2009, 2014. And we had some interesting discoveries, which actually came in some ways out of naivety because the approach was new. I can mention certainly one of the highlights was the discovery of these megaviruses in Chile. So this is really an interesting example. But so there's a question if how to reach more people. But of course, our big challenge is how to reach industry.
how can we get more people from industry to come to use the infrastructures? Certainly, I don't have much problem locally. They know us, and the companies come and use our infrastructure to some level. But these European programs require that transnational access. So for a company in Italy to come to Portugal or vice versa, then it becomes a bit more complicated. On the other hand, there are examples in European programs like the RISE programs, where in fact, what it all amounts to academia going to spend periods in a company and vice versa. And this also seems to work fairly well. So the argument that maybe there is no time for industry to come and spend time in the infrastructure may not be quite correct, in the sense that sometimes it works. So I don't know if what is your position in this. So, but these are the key, some of our, let's say, what we think about and what we keep questioning about is, really how to reach more scientists, but also how to reach industry. So, or maybe Claire, because you are more on the economic side, maybe you can have.
Sure. So I think that's one of the big challenges that many public research institutes are facing. Whatever they do, they want to make sure that they do reach a larger group of scientists. So the usual suspects, but also beyond, making sure that they indeed, increase I would say the number of users typically. So you have different cases where the first one is typically you have a limited capacity, so you need to sort of pick and choose who's coming. At this stage, I do believe that that's not yet the case for many of the stations. The other case is, of course, you want to encourage, I would say, much more, and definitely one of the key area to attract, I would say, more private sector users would be to promote transdisciplinary collaborations. And this is something that we are seeing here, particularly with these research and innovation networks we're talking about. So you take basically a theme like aquaculture, robotics, again, ocean energy, a rather large theme. And under there, then you show the portfolio of what can be done. And I guess, Nicholas, that was also one of your key points. You can do so many different types of research, sometimes so much that people may get a bit lost. But here, indeed, that has to do a bit with communication, picking big themes and then the portfolio. And I'm sure you're already doing this, where I see some, stronger competition coming up is that indeed more and more actors are interested in aquaculture, in ocean energy. And that's where you need to be able to differentiate yourself, and I guess Assemble in particular as this opportunity to indeed show such a diversity of places where you can do research, where you can do comparability. That's really an advantage, I would say.
Yeah. Anyone else would like to add some more to this?
May I say something on this, Adelino, linking with what you said about transnational access and the challenge to reach industry? I'm involved in also the Euroflis Plus project, which is the third edition of the Euroflis action. We bring together different research vessels and associated equipment. We give access to those facilities in a different way, virtually, physically, or remotely. The point was that we were able to attract researchers from different countries from Europe. The problem was we were not so successful in attracting industry. And this is, as you said, a big challenge. And we have in the project participation of industry, but they are mainly involved in joint research activities instead of have access to our facilities. But I would like also to highlight how the contribution that the participation in infrastructure projects can give. Infrastructure project, European infrastructure projects can offer possibility to European researcher, but also European industry to work together and to move from having industry only as a supplier or as a users to move from this paradigm towards the engagement of industry as a co-creator or co-development of new development. If we just to add the last point, if we talk about research infrastructure in general, there are differences in terms of engagement, mainly based organizational model of the research infrastructure, single site or distributed site, the budgets. And if we look at the marine domain, we work with pan-European distributed research infrastructures, normally with a budget below 5 million per year. And so this is something that we need to take into consideration. I've seen, just to conclude, in the chat, a comment from Ilaria Nardello, and I also would like to inform about this project, Enrich Network, which work to strengthen relationship between industry and research infrastructures, and they've done a good survey from different research infrastructures, try to understand the relationship, the barrier, and among the different type of research infrastructures. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Sheila, do you have anything else to add to this, or?
Yeah, I was kind of thinking one of the best examples of where I saw industry working very well with academia in that sense was a PhD program, an engineering PhD program in the renewable energy that SAMS had, or that SAMS was part of. And actually what they did was they only had 2 weeks with these engineering students where they basically trained them in this is the marine ecosystem and this is what it looks like. The program was called ID Core. I think it's still going. And that's actually been one of the best ways to get the industry to be interested in what's happening and to show them, to showcase some of the science that's done, and this was around renewable energy. So it was engineering students in renewable energy. This is what a phytoplankton looks like. This is what a marine mammal looks like. And this is how it fits together. And I think this is one of the things that you guys could probably think about, because you do have the facility to do that quite well. It's telling me my internet connection is unstable, so maybe you can't hear me now.
Yeah, we can. We are still
Can you hear me?
We can still hear you.
Excellent. Thanks. Yeah. The second thing, I was actually going to move away from industry and talk about a different avenue that I think you guys could really look at. And that is the possibilities of biobanks, because there's quite a lot of work and possibilities in oceans and human health perspective, where having the facility to know what's in your area could really be a good boon for possible scanning of viruses, scanning of any kind of pollutants. So that's something that you guys should really think about. And it's definitely something that we highlighted in the SOFI project on oceans and human health that probably, hopefully, will come out as a Horizon Europe call. So that's something to think about. And I think there's definitely facilities in Assemble to do that.
Yeah, so that's certainly one point. We're doing already some of that, but there is more. And even this morning we had, in fact, this is part of a question that we had to put it forward. But even this morning we had a talk which very much highlighted another issue related to this biobanks in some ways, which is the fact that, biodiversity, and that means interspecific biodiversity, is at risk with the climate change. And in fact, they are the first ones to go. And so knowing where this biodiversity is, we can, hopefully keep it somehow. And of course, this needs, if you want to keep it, it needs active storage somewhere. So in this case, it was different kinds of kelp, but basically they are disappearing at a very high rate. Not the kelp themselves, but the nuclear populations that have the largest diversity. So the ones at the edge of the advances, according to latitude to the north or to the south, depending on the hemisphere, of course, they are thriving in some ways, but the ones at the base, they are disappearing. And so this is another issue. I think your point is a very good one. And I wonder if there are any other aspects that, the panel thinks that we should be looking at as part of a strategy to, well, this is linked to sustainability. The most important we are, the more important, the easier it will be to demonstrate, our role. Okay. So biobanks is certainly a very good idea. Well, we had a few other questions here. One of them was what you think is the next big challenge in marine biology and how we can support tackling it. So I think this is one that you have already put. I mean, climate change is certainly one, and we've got the ocean decade issues. But I don't know if you want to comment on any of these. The future, basically.
Well, if I may, I think it falls a little bit on the shoulders of the team that really forms the core of Assemble. It's going to be your communication campaign, because your strength here again is that you are bringing together very different different marine stations, different research institutions, and with this, then you do have, I think, a big credibility towards not only the European Commission, but also other policymakers at the end of the day, even at national levels. Again, whenever talking to any policymakers that's interested more or less in the ocean, sometimes they all put the scientists in the same bag. Here, you have the opportunity to make sure that marine biology is well recognized. So I guess that's really one of the big things for the near future, making sure that some of the message, and I talked about value proposition, it's also a scientific value proposition, demonstrating again and again that indeed you need to do the biology to actually solve the climate change issues too. One cannot go without the other. The loss of biodiversity is so dire that we need to make sure that these stations are well funded over the long run. Yeah. So at the OECD, particularly in my directorate, in science and technology, this is something that we are obviously aware of, and we're proponents of actually making sure that high quality science is well recognized as is funded over a sustained period. But indeed, in the part of scientists, some of the elements for this initial value proposition are needed. And that's where then I see a lot of work for the Assemble team.
Great, thank you. Any other comments? I mean, I think we are really starting to wrap up, and I don't see any questions on the chat.
There's one interesting point that I think is worth mentioning, which was raised by Yvonne Cancio on the aspect of regional economies as well. So Yvonne, I don't know if you want to raise this point yourself.
Yeah, the thing is, it was on reaction to one of the comments of Claire on her presentation on the flowering of ocean innovation ecosystems worldwide. And she provided some examples And when you look at the examples, you really see that they are regionally driven. Then when you think about marine biological stations, we are by definition, we are peripheral. So we are peripheral, and that means that we are very linked and very rooted to our regional ecosystems and to the marine economy there. So we are bound to be regionally driven innovation ecosystems. And when Claire has presented this flowering of the innovation ecosystems, I have heard some kind of a negative glitch on them. No? Like they are too many and they could be competing among themselves, but they are so much linked to the regional, to the regions in which they are established. The good thing would be here to find ways in which these regional innovation ecosystems, they could be collaborating among themselves. No? So bridging all the gap between region, state, Europe, and the world. No?
Absolutely. And if I may add just one thing here, you're absolutely right. This is one of the strengths of the stations to be regional. But let me give you just the example of Canada. And some of you might be very well aware of that. There's obviously some regional competition, well, provincial competition. But one way for the Canadian government to solve this was to create this ocean supercluster, forcing a little bit the different regions, Dalhousie with Halifax and Quebec, to actually work together, so that all the different regional experts could actually be able to work together while still getting some funding at federal, national level. So that was a big change that was quite recent in terms of making sure that indeed these different networks that we're building at regional levels could actually interconnect well. So there was some policy intervention at national level to make sure that everything was going well. And you can see this in other countries, even in Europe. So building on your regional expertise and building the links at regional level with the regional economy, that's perfect. But obviously you will always need to have this link with the national level, so as not to make, as not to be in direct competition for national funds.
and European funds, so to say.
And that's
so,
of course.
So this could be the cement work that EMBSC could be doing at the European level, just connecting these regional innovation ecosystems built up around the regional marine biological stations. So well, the cluster here would be EMBSC.
But I think there is the Committee of Peripheral Regions in Europe. They are better placed to do this kind of moderation. But I'm not sure how effective they are. At least, I think that not all the regions are too involved. At least that's my perspective. But I'm not completely sure. I'm not completely familiar with it. But we have tried to engage with the CPMR, more than once. But I guess this is it will take some time, but it's I think that's where the policymakers are, and so we have to deal with them, and we have to basically support them, because that's also how the money reaches these ecosystems. But basically it. So I just ask if I think we are getting close to the end of this conversation. It was very nice and really very helpful. I would like to ask if you'd like to do any more, to make any more comments, final comments, from any of the panelists at this stage.
If you guys can hear me now, maybe I'll just speak quickly before I go offline again. The one other thing that I was thinking that would be quite interesting for you to think about is that there's just been a call out for the digital twin of the ocean. And from what I've seen from the call, there will definitely be a need for, again, coming back to the vast amounts of data that you have of the local environment, for creating a local digital twin or a avatar, I think it's called, even a digital representation of what your area looks like, and you hold the data quite often to show that. So that's something that you could really think about, is maybe not as a network, well, also as a network, but as an individual research station. You might have the data to really show what this ecosystem looks like. And I think there might be possibilities in when the proposals are funded to link into that kind of stuff. So that's something to really look forward to.
Thank you.
If I may say, I just want to highlight again the opportunity that we have this time with this European Commission public consultation on ocean marine observation, which I think is really a good opportunity. Is ending. It will end, I think, 19th of February, and this year. And the idea is to collect different road mappings, different priority from different stakeholders, as I said also from my presentation, to bring together who funds observation, who use observation, but also in terms of industry, who sell equipment or use or produce manufacture. So I think this could be a good opportunity to share a different point of views, regional point of views. I don't know then how this information will be used. I'm not so familiar on this task, but I think we have not missed this opportunity. Thanks.
Thank you, Giuseppe. Well, thank you very much. It was a big pleasure not only to meet you, but also this, I think we had a very interesting conversation. It's certainly, I learned quite a bit, and I can see some avenues that we can take and ideas that we can pick. And thank you very much. And I'm sure we'll meet in the future, because these issues are important, and they are always, coming back. And so thank you very much, everyone, and hope you can continue to follow our meeting. Thank you very much, and see you again. Bye-bye.
Thanks again, Angelino, Nicolas, all the colleagues. Bye.
Thank you, everybody, for participating, and thanks to the panelists. All the best.
Thanks, Nicolas.
Ciao from Italy. Bye.
Thank you. Thanks.